Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Vivienne Clevens' play Bitin Back, which I'm reading out of Contemporary Indigenous Plays. So first off, this is a collection of plays by Aboriginal Australian playwrights, and Cleven adapted this play from her novel of the same name. It is a satire. It's a farce, but it's not necessarily as much a sort of slapstick and like one door opens as another door closes type farce. There's some degree of mistaken identity, which largely revolves around, a double identity used by a particular drug dealer and by Neville Dooley's cross-dressing. The play really follows Mavis Dooley. She's our protagonist, and her son is Neville Dooley. And what she really wants is that he becomes a very successful football player. And this would be Australian rules football. I'm wearing a version of an Australian soccer jersey, basically football to most of the world. But like the U.S., where we have our own version of football, American football, as it's often called in other countries, Australia has footy, or Australian rules football. And Neville Dooley's really, really good at it. He is one of the top two people in this small town, and there are selectors coming to choose one person to basically get drafted up to the majors, I guess, is the sort of colloquial phrasing, at least here in the U.S. And Mavis wants this more than anything for Neville. She believes that this is the way out of poverty. This is the way that he can escape this small town, that he can become successful, that he can become maybe wealthy, or at the very least comfortable. And they live in very much this sort of small rural town. And as Aboriginal Australians, they are in this sort of interstitial space, this borderline space in Australian society, in similar ways to how Indigenous people are in the U.S. and Canada. The Maori are a bit more central to New Zealand culture nowadays, but traditionally the Maori were in a similar sort of second-class type position. And so Mavis believes that this is her son's way out. And there's actually a lot of parallels to this in U.S. culture. As an American, this was something that I very much sort of identified as a cultural issue that exists here. You think about all of the sort of narratives of particularly young African-American men who believe that sports, or rap in particular, are their ways out of poverty, the only ways open to them, that who feel rightly in many cases, or wrongly in some cases, that things like education, business ownership, these kinds of avenues simply are not open to them. And again, that's often, unfortunately, more true than we would ideally want it to be. Aboriginal Australians, I think, are very much in a sort of similar position. Often effectively ghettoized. They are often they have limited access to education, limited access to capital, limited access to power within their society, the larger society of Australia as a settler colonial nation. But they also face the kinds of issues that, say, Native Americans face, First Nations, Canadians, Métis, Inuit, etc. peoples, which is that they've been dispossessed of their land, they've largely had their cultures stripped away from them, and they have experienced generational trauma. Now, Cleven doesn't go too deep into most of this. That's simply the stuff in the background. But it is... Sorry, I think that's a cat hair in my mouth. That's what you get for owning a cat. But that's in sort of the background of Clevens' play. It's an important context, but it's so sort of fundamental at such an experientially basic level for the lives of her characters that there is not that much overt discussion of it. There are a few instances where it comes up, like, for instance, the character Trevor, who's a white publisher. He owns a press in Brisbane, and he has come actually to see Neville, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But Trevor gets mistaken for this drug dealer named Isaac Edge. Yes. And he gets arrested, and he is beaten by the police. And as he is sort of being released, because they realize it was not him, Trevor says, "That bastard detective assaulted me. I should sue him in this shitty little cop shop, too." Mavis says, "Never mind, love. You're lucky you're not a black fella, otherwise you'd have been crawling out of there." So there are these moments where there very clearly is this racial consciousness, this consciousness of inequality within Australian society. But the play is, again, primarily about this sort of interpersonal conflict between Mavis and Neville. And I haven't really gotten to that yet. I talked about Mavis's objective, right? Mavis's goal that Neville become a football star, he become successful, he become famous, he become financially stable, etc., etc. That's not what Neville wants. So what Neville wants is to become a writer. So Neville has taken to dressing in women's clothing and wearing makeup and things like this. I'm actually not 100% clear that he's trans or that he's a transvestite or anything like this. It's a little bit ambiguous, at least as I read the play. He, at some point toward the end, seems to set this up as part of a broader kind of campaign of escaping the expectations of this community, including the expectation that he become a football star. So it's not 100% clear, to me, at least. It may be more clear in performance. But at one point, Mavis and her brother Booty, they are not thrilled with Neville's decision to begin wearing women's clothing and wearing makeup and things like this. And so they make various attempts to make him a man or get his head screwed on straight, or there's various ways that they sort of phrase it, all of which suggest either that he has become effeminate and needs to no longer be effeminate, or that he has, in some sense, gone crazy and needs to be straightened out. But at one point, about halfway into the play, I think, Mavis comes into Neville's room where they have sort of locked him in until he agrees to stop wearing dresses and makeup and go to the football clubhouse to meet the selectors and try and impress them to take him for the team. So Mavis comes in and asks basically what Neville is doing, and he says, just writing. Mavis says, writing what? Neville says, well, it's a story. Mavis says, waste of time. There's no future in writing stupid bloody stories. Now on your feet and off to see the coach. Quick, on the double. Neville says, I'm not going anywhere. Got better things to do, important stuff to think about. Mavis says, that's enough, Neville. Stop talking like that. Neville says, Mom, there's other things in life apart from footy. Oh, why do I bother? No matter what I say, you always want things your way. Mavis says, football is your way out of this town, your future. Now across to the clubhouse, everyone's counting on you. Don't mess this up, Neville. Neville says, just listen to me, will you, Mom? I don't care about football. Not interested. Let them pick Jeremy Reedman. Jeremy Reedman is the sort of... He's the other main sort of budding football star in this town, and what's his mom's name? Dorothy Reedman is basically Mavis's arch nemesis, I guess is the right way of putting it. So Dorothy Reedman, back when they were younger, and when Booty Dooley, Mavis's brother, had the opportunity to become a successful football star, Dorothy Reedman had spread stories which Mavis claims are lies, that Booty was a drunk, and so he lost his opportunity to play. Since then, Mavis hates a lie and hates Dorothy Reedman. And so when Dorothy Reedman starts basically scheming to get her son Jeremy the spot that Mavis believes rightly belongs to Neville, that really galvanizes Mavis to significantly try to push Neville to take this opportunity. A lot of the central conflict of the play revolves around these two characters having different aspirations for his life. Again, Mavis very much wants him to become a football star because she sees sport as his way out of poverty, out of this small town, out of the cycle of alcoholism, violence, small-time criminality, etc., that sort of plagues this small rural community. Neville, on the other hand, he has written a novel, as we find out toward the end of the play. He has written a novel that seems to some extent to be almost inspired by his mother, although that's never explicitly stated. And Trevor has come from Brisbane, the owner of this publishing company, because he wants to publish Neville's novel and basically bring Neville back to Brisbane and sort of nurture his artistic talent. And so there's a whole series of misunderstandings, misidentifications. Dorothy Reedman schemes against Mavis. Mavis schemes against Dorothy. There's also some sort of minor plots where Dorothy's friend is dating this drug dealer, and that ends up creating some havoc, etc., etc. But ultimately, because this is a comedy, because this is a farce, we end up with a happy ending. And so, hashtag spoilers, I guess. Sorry, too late. But again, because it's a comedy, it's going to have a happy ending. That's just the way it goes. So that's not really that much of a spoiler. But the thing I find very fascinating about the ending of this is actually in some ways, a very apropos ending to a comedy, because basically, so I'll read you this portion, and then I'll tell you why I think this is an interesting comic ending. So they're wrapping everything up, right? Everything has sort of gotten straightened out. Mavis says, I didn't count on all that other stuff going down in terms of the drugs, the police, cops, guns going off, etc., all the other stuff that goes wrong. But I had to do things my way, take my chances, break away from what everyone else thought. I'm just sorry that everything got out of hand. Mavis says, okay, then what's this book about? Neville says, it's a Murray woman, Lucinda, living in the bush, trying to rebuild a life that's been destroyed by gossip and lies. So that's what makes me think that this is largely inspired by his mother, because she spends a lot of time being very critical of gossip and very critical of lies. Mavis says, but why write as a woman? Neville says, it comes down to this. It's easier to be a man in this town than to be a woman, because a woman's got to be as tough as a man and not show it. Booty says, biggest load of shit man's ever heard. Trevor, raising his hand, says, Mrs. Dooley, can I say something here? Neville was ashamed of his own talent, but didn't think anyone in this town would understand him. I predict great things for Neville. His novel is brilliantly achieved, and Lucinda is a unique, unforgettable character. Mavis says, what can a woman say here, except, Neville, you sure make your old mother real proud. You always come good in the end, eh? So the reason I think this is a very apropos comic ending is often, at the ending of a comedy, things just work out. This is a weird sort of quirk of the comic genre, right? Often things do not work out as a natural result of the logic of the story. Things just work out. Right? Mavis has spent this entire play being like, no, you cannot write, you need to go and play football. And now she's basically just like, well, I'm proud of you for writing so well. It literally is just that 180-degree turn for very little actual reason. Very little about it actually seems justified. But it's a happy, feel-good ending. And so it fits for a comedy.